Let's start again, and coming towards the end of these suttas. And one of the suttas I'm going to have a look at now is one that summarizes the path to awakening in a very kind of nice and very succinct way. And that's why I like this particular sutta. I remember sometimes when you read the suttas, there are things that kind of stand out. You think, wow, that's different, that's unusual and very interesting. I remember reading the sutta, never heard anybody talking about the sutta before, but you kind of still interesting in a particular way. So this sutta is called Nibbana from the Anguttara Nikaya 4, and this is how it goes. Very simple little sutta. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the Venerable Sariputta and said to him, "Why is it, friend Sariputta, that some beings do not attain Nibbana in this very life?" Here, friend Ananda, some beings do not understand as it really is. These perceptions lead to deterioration. These perceptions lead to stability. These perceptions lead to improvement or distinction. These perceptions lead to penetration. This is why some beings here do not attain Nibbana in this very life. Why is it, friend Sariputta, that some beings here do attain Nibbana in this very life? Here, friend Ananda, some beings understand as it really is. These perceptions lead to deterioration. These perceptions lead to stability. These perceptions lead to improvement or distinction. And these perceptions pertain to penetration or it's penetration. This is why some beings here attain Nibbana in this very life. So there you are, that's all you have to do to attain Nibbana, right? Easy, straightforward. But it's quite nice because I think it summarizes the path that we are talking about in a very succinct and beautiful way. We've been talking a lot about using the mind to give rise to the right kind of perceptions, right? Putting aside the perceptions that have to do with ill will, with sensuality, perceptions that lead you in the wrong direction, and then using the mind to give rise to the right perceptions, the right thoughts, the right attitudes. These are all basically the same kind of things, really. Perception, attitudes, thoughts, kind of heading in the right direction. So all you really have to do is, if you understand this, of course, if you understand which perceptions are bad for you, that is the basis, that is the foundation for actually developing and using your mind in accordance with that understanding. So you have to understand this. If you don't understand which perceptions lead to decline, it means you will develop those perceptions, right? You will incline towards them because you don't understand they are bad for you. And this is one of the big challenges of the Buddhist path, is actually to fully understand what is dangerous, what leads down, and what heads you in the right direction. Sometimes the defilements are very subtle. It's very difficult to know fully which perceptions are problematic and which are good ones. The sense of self is very profound, very deep-seated in us, and because of that, again, sometimes very hard to know which perceptions you should develop and which you shouldn't. But once you start to get the hang of this, once you start to investigate your mind and you see what is problematic, what isn't, then of course you start to have this ability to lead your mind in the right direction. And then all you have to do is to observe yourself, to look at how you're looking at things, how you're looking at the world. And if you're able every moment, not every moment, but kind of regularly, right, pretty much continuously, the more mindfulness you have, the more continuous this is. If you have the ability to guard the mind at all times and see if you have the perception which leads to improvement, that leads to Nibbana, leads to penetration. Penetration means insight here. If it leads to all those things and you're able to guard your mind in that direction, then you are always going to be heading towards Nibbana. And that's really all you have to do. Right? That's all you have to do. If you do that consistently all the time, in meditation, outside meditation, any time when you are awake and you are aware, then you are going in the right direction and you will eventually get there as a consequence. A very beautiful and simple way of understanding the whole path of Buddhism. Knowing whether you have the right attitude, the right perception or not. And if the perception isn't right, then changing your attitude, changing your perception, so it goes in the right way here. So that is just a very small one, just to set the stage for what comes afterwards, because one of the things that you do find in the sutras, you do find, especially in the Anguttara Nikaya, you do find a fairly large number of sutras that talk specifically about the development of perception. Various kind of perceptions that we develop. It's like I was saying before, you have this kind of storehouse, right? You go to a shop and you have this top shelf, you have all these various perceptions, and whenever you need to use them for whatever reason, you can take them down. So you develop them first, and then you can use them later on at the required time, at the required place. So I will have a look at, in a second, I will have a look at one of the main suttas that talk about development of perception. But before I do that, I'll just have a very quick look at this other sutta called Sakka's Question, which is taken from the Samyutta Nikaya. And this is just to put a little bit more flesh on the bones of the previous sutta, because it is a little bit succinct, hard to know exactly what is going on, and this kind of adds a little bit of information to that. So this is, I don't know if it has any relation to the Sakkapanya Sutta, but maybe this is another occasion when Sakka comes down and asks his questions or whatever. So let's have a quick look at this sutta here. Sakka's question here. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Rajagaha on Mount Vulture Peak. Then Sakka, Lord of the Devas, approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, stood to one side, and said to him, Venerable Sir, what is the cause and reason why some beings here do not attain Nibbana in this very life? And what is the cause and reason why some beings here attain Nibbana in this very life? There are, Lord of the Devas, forms cognizable by the eye that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tantalizing. If a bhikkhu seeks delight in them, welcomes them, and remains holding to them, his consciousness becomes dependent upon them and clings to them. A bhikkhu with clinging does not attain Nibbana. There are, Lord of the Devas, sounds cognizable by the ear, and then you have, of course, odors cognizable by the nose, taste cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body, mental phenomena cognizable by the mind, that are desired, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, and tantalizing. If a bhikkhu seeks delight in them, welcomes them, and remains holding to them, his consciousness becomes dependent upon them and clings to them. A bhikkhu with clinging does not attain Nibbana. So here we have exactly the same question as in the previous sutta, but here the answer is much more specific, right? In the previous one, it just talks in general about which perceptions, about perception to be developed in a very general sense, and here it is very specific. And of course that is interesting, because what that means is it gives us probably the most important perception to develop to actually be able to move towards Nibbana. And the most important one is to understand the danger, the problem in sensual desire, right? As it says here, if a bhikkhu seeks delight in these things, right? And here you have almost like a little aspect of dependent arising as well in there. You seek delight in them, welcome them, hold on to them. This is part of the upadana. Then the consciousness becomes established there, right? Dependent upon those. It clings to that. And this is kind of course, then the whole course or dependent origination is set in motion because of that. This is exactly what leads to rebirth in the future, and you are trapped in samsara. And of course, for that reason, you don't attain Nibbana. So this is like, if you want, this is kind of the prime perception, right? The prime problem, the prime underlying thing that stops us from getting to samadhi, and then from samadhi to insight, the profound insights following that. So this kind of puts a bit of meat on those bones. So a very important aspect of the meditation, probably the most important one, is to learn how to overcome these sensual desires, including, of course, attachment to the body itself. So all of this is is part of that. Okay. Then we have the opposite. So this is the cause and reason, Lord of the Devas, why some beings here do not attain Nibbana in this very life. There are, Lord of the Devas, forms cognizable by the eye, etc., sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, taste cognizable by the tongue, tangibles cognizable by the body, mental phenomena cognizable by the mind, that are desirable, lovely, agreeable, pleasing, sensually enticing, tantalizing. If a bhikkhu does not seek delight in them, does not welcome them, and does not remain holding to them, his consciousness does not become dependent upon them and cling to them. A bhikkhu without clinging attains Nibbana. This is the cause and reason, Lord of the Devas, why some beings here attain Nibbana in this very life. So you might wonder, how can it be that only overcoming sensual pleasures in this way takes you all the way to Nibbana? What about we're talking about before, the bhavhatana, right? The desire for existence, which is even more profound, even deeper seated in the human psychology than the attachment to sensual pleasures. And I think the reason is simply that this is the main obstacle. Once you overcome this obstacle, then the path is relatively easy and relatively clear from there. And this is a bit like when you look at the Noble Eightfold Path. Sometimes you wonder, the Noble Eightfold Path ends with Samma Samadhi, right? What about the insights? What about the Te Vijajas we have been talking about? What about all of that? And sometimes you do see the Noble Tenfold Path in the suttas. It has Samma Jnana, Samma Vimutti after Samma Samadhi, but usually it's just the Noble Eightfold Path. And that, I think, is the same reason that you're seeing here. You're seeing that once you get to Samma Samadhi, it means you have put aside all those sensual pleasures, all the delight, all the attachment to the body, all the attachment to the worldly things of the world. All that has been put aside already here. And because of that, Samma Samadhi, basically, you are so close to the end of the path. So this is very similar in a sense to that Samma Samadhi. Once you have that, all you have to do is direct your mind in the right direction, and then the insights come as a consequence. So Samma Samadhi, in a way, is the end of the path, because that's all you have to do. Beyond that, if you have right view, it's just a natural progression towards awakening as a consequence of that. So this is the hard part, right? This is the difficult part, to get out of this. And beyond that, it is more or less automatic as a consequence of that. So that is just as a way of background. The sutta that I'm really interested in having a look at today is the Girimananda Sutta. And it is a sutta on all these different types of perceptions that we can develop. And sometimes this is useful because often people ask about various topics for meditation practice. Somebody asked yesterday, could we please have another type of guided meditation, another kammatthana, another object? And I thought about it, but usually personally, there's certain objects that I like to focus on, and that's usually what I teach. If I kind of go too far outside of those things, then it's not going to be as useful, I think. So I like to focus on these things that I'm used to practicing myself. But here is an expansion of that field, looking at different perceptions, different things, different ways we can use the mind and think about the Dhamma to expand our understanding here. So for that reason, this sutta is quite interesting here. And as I said before, there are lots of suttas very similar to this one in the Anguttara Nikaya that talks about the development of perception. This is perhaps similar to what some people will call vipassana, right? You're looking at the five khandhas and these kind of things. But you notice in the suttas, it's actually never called vipassana. It's called the development of sanya. Sanya, looking at things in a particular way here. In the suttas, all of this is bhavana, and various types of bhavana lead to both samatha and vipassana. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Let's start off from the beginning here. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove Anathapindika's park. Now, on that occasion, the Venerable Girimananda was sick, afflicted and gravely ill. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, Bhante, the Venerable Girimananda is sick, afflicted, and gravely ill. It would be good if the Blessed One would visit him out of compassion. If, Ananda, you visit the Bhikkhu Girimananda and speak to him about 10 perceptions, it is possible that on hearing about them, his affliction will immediately subside. What are the 10? So here you have there's this interesting idea that you find some places in the suttas, that if you recite the Dhamma to somebody, that is enough to alleviate the sickness in a person. And it's an interesting idea, and I'm not sure exactly how to understand it. It is also found in the, I think it's the Kanda Samyutta, in the Kanda the Bojjhanga Samyutta, that's right, in the Bojjhanga Samyutta, there's 3 suttas where monks and even the Buddha recite the Bojjhangas for somebody who is sick. And as soon as they hear the Bojjhangas from somebody else, they kind of arise from that sickness. And the most curious one is where the Buddha himself is ill, right? And then he says to Mahachunda, one of the great arahants at the time of the Buddha, according to the suttas, and he says to Mahachunda, please recite the 7 factors of awakening. So Mahachunda does that, and then the Buddha comes out of his illness. Right? It's kind of strange. You wonder, why does the Buddha need to hear the 7 Bojjhangas? If there's anybody who understands the Bojjhangas, it is obviously the Buddha. He understands the factors of awakening better than anyone. He is the one who invented these factors of awakening, right? So it's strange, but perhaps there is something there. I don't know what it is, what actually does this, but there seems to be some kind of possibility. Maybe it's just the goodwill or something going on there. I'm not entirely sure, but this seems to be established in the suttas. Not sure how important it is, because it's not many places, but it does occur in a few places. So if anybody has an idea as how this works, please let me know, because I'm not clear about that. Okay, so now let's have a look at these perceptions. So they are as follows: the perception of impermanence, the perception of non-self, the perception of unattractiveness, the perception of danger, the perception of abandoning, the perception of dispassion, the perception of cessation, the perception of non-delight in the entire world, the perception of impermanence in all conditioned phenomena, and lastly, mindfulness of breathing here. So there you have a very diverse ways to develop the mind, and this is almost like a summary of not all, but most of the perceptions that are found throughout the suttas. And many of you have been talking about these things at the interviews and things like contemplating the 5 khandhas, and of course this is comes in here as well. So now we can turn to these ones. Let's see what the detailed exposition actually is. And what, Ananda, is the perception of impermanence? Here, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, a bhikkhu reflects thus: form is impermanent, feeling is impermanent, perception is impermanent, willed activities are impermanent, consciousness is impermanent. Thus he dwells contemplating impermanence in the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates, subject to clinging. This is called the perception of impermanence. Right? Sounds very easy, right? You just go back to your room and you think, oh, form is impermanent, feeling is impermanent. And you can see here that the problem with this kind of thing is that it is very abstract. When it's given like this, it's very abstract. And it shows you that just thinking about these things in an abstract way is often not going to work very well. You have to have a framework. You have a way in which to actually get a handle on what these things are. But first of all, what is obviously of interest here is this first phrase as well, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut. Often these kind of introductory phrases that start off a particular contemplation, these are very important because they set the stage for how these things are done. right? And this here, this example here, having gone to the forest, etc., this is a standard phrase that is used in many places in the suttas, but in particular it is used together with anapanasati here. So anapanasati, always you have the going to the forest. And the point is, of course, is that when you see that phrase, what we are talking about is real meditation practice. The practice where you have to withdraw from society to get maximum solitude to enable the meditation to develop to the max. So this is what is meant here. And this is any kind of really serious meditation practice. Anyone which is going to take you really deep happens in solitude. That is what this is really saying here. Now, sometimes people think, oh, you know, if you go into solitude, it's kind of a little bit selfish perhaps and these kind of things. But it's all about balance, right? You go to solitude for a while, you get your meditation together, get some insights, and then when you have something to talk about, then you kind of come back to society here, and then you kind of share the understanding you have. And this, of course, is the ideal according to the suttas. Before you get to samadhi, before your mind is ready for that, still you can sort of stay in the sangha, you can do various duties, you can be of benefit to other people, because all of that is an important path as well. But there comes a point when withdrawal from the world has a very powerful effect on the mind that enables you to access these states which otherwise are very hard to access. So this is actually a very important part of the path. It's not a matter of being selfish, it's a matter of being pragmatic of what actually works. This is really the point here. So this happens in solitude, and this shows us that one of the things this shows us is that this particular reflection here of impermanence, it is based on profound meditation. It is based on samadhi. It is not something that you can just do just like that in ordinary life with an ordinary defiled and scattered mind. It happens as a consequence of samadhi practice. This is one of the important points here. And then once you have that, you have been through the process of samadhi, then these things, contemplating the five khandhas in this way, actually becomes possible. And it becomes possible because then you have some data to work with. And the data you have to work with is the process that takes you into samadhi in the first place. That process gives you lots of data to work with afterwards. Why is that? Well, because the process of going into samadhi is precisely one of seeing the impermanence of these things. As you go into samadhi, I've been talking about this here before, but it's probably something worth repeating. As you go into samadhi, right, the body, first of all, you start to feel ease. Then the body starts to disappear, right? You're only staying with the breath. The body is fading away, viraga. This is one of the aspects of anicca. And eventually, as you enter samadhi fully, the body disappears completely here. In fact, not only does it disappear completely, but you have no access to the body anymore, even if you can't even want to feel the body at that point. And of course, when you have no access to it at all, then you understand that this is really impermanent in a very real sense, because it actually has ceased completely. It doesn't exist to you anymore at all whatsoever. So that is why this process there becomes a very powerful process for understanding anicca. You have seen it in your own experience, and then when you contemplate it afterwards, the very powerful insights can arise from that. So you collect the data through your samadhi, more and more data, and then when you come out of samadhi the other end and you look back on what happens, because you have all the data, insight becomes very powerful at that point. But it's not just the body. Of course, another aspect of the body is the five senses, right? This is also part of the form aggregate here, the senses. Exactly the same process happens with the senses. Gradually, they cease, they fade away until they cease completely. Until you get into a state of deep samadhi, you don't even have access to the five senses anymore. They're completely outside of your range of ability to experience. And then again, this becomes the basis for insight. Same thing happens with feeling, right? Feelings are changing as you go through this. Some of the feelings cease completely. When you enter samadhi, there is no longer any negative feelings. All bad feelings have gone. All that is left is piti sukha, right? So that has ceased completely. So the feelings are changing. Your perceptions are obviously changing dramatically. You're going from a world where you have lots of perceptions about all kinds of things, and until you have a perception of just almost nothing. All that is left in your perceptual experience is piti sukha when you enter into the jhana states, for example. Right? So again, massive change in perception. The vast majority of perceptions have ceased, and all you have left is this tiny little field of perception, which is the perception in jhana itself. Same thing with the chaitana, the sankharas, the will of the mind. The will becomes more and more refined as you go through this process. The viraga, the fading away of the will, until eventually you enter a state of deep samadhi, especially things like the second jhana. All chaitana, all will has completely ceased. You cannot want anything anymore. You can't direct anything. You are like in a frozen state, very happily frozen state, just blissing out for hours perhaps, right? Long periods of time. And then you come out of these things afterwards, you understand, wow, now I understand what this will is all about, what a tyrant it is. But fortunately, it is impermanent. And then you get insight into the will. And the most profound one, of course, is consciousness itself. And consciousness itself is, as we have seen before, classified in the suttas into 6 classes. Each sense base, or each sense, is its own type of consciousness. So they too cease, right? And then when you come to the, when all the senses are gone, you're left with only one class of consciousness, the mind consciousness. And then as you go through the jhanas, you can see that that mind consciousness itself is starting to cease, starting to disappear stage by stage as you go through these things. And again, this becomes then the power, the basis for insight. So this is the way that I understand the perception of impermanence here. You have to build up the data, and when you have some data, then this kind of reflection becomes useful and powerful. If you just try to reflect on impermanence of these things from your daily experience, you can of course do that, but it's a very shallow kind of reflection that you have, very shallow kind of contemplation, because our daily experience are so, the mind is so, it's just, all you're seeing is this movement all the time, this movement around. You're not seeing any real cessation, any real fading away, which you see through this process. You don't have to go all the way to jhana to do this. You can do it also with lesser meditation. Whenever you feel a bit peaceful and you feel that things are fading away, you can always reflect a little bit on this afterwards, just to get a little bit of insight into what is going. In particular, it's very useful to get that insight about the body, right? Because the body being our biggest problem, biggest attachment, we've just seen that before. Getting rid of sensual desire is kind of the clue, perhaps, to moving towards Nibbana. So because of that, it can be useful sometimes to get a bit of insight into the body and the senses as such. So this is how I would understand to develop the contemplation of impermanence. And we will see later on that this particular process, this particular understanding is very strongly confirmed and supported by how the Anapanasati Sutta, or the general progress of Anapanasati, is explained in the suttas as well here. So, there you are, perception of impermanence. Then let us have a look at the next one. And what Ananda is the perception of non-self. Here, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, a bhikkhu reflects thus. The eye is non-self, forms are non-self, the ear is non-self, sounds are non-self, the nose is non-self, odors are non-self, the tongue is non-self, tastes are non-self, the body is non-self, tactile objects are non-self, the mind is non-self, mental phenomena are non-self. Thus he dwells contemplating non-self in these 6 internal and external sense fields or sense spaces. This is called the perception of non-self. I prefer field for ayatana because quite literally it means like a spreading out, a stretching out. And to me a field has more to do with a stretching out than a base. I'm not sure exactly. A base is kind of just has a sense of foundation almost. But anyway, these are sometimes varies depending on the person, what kind of word makes best sense to them. But here again, you can see the similar kind of starting out. It starts off with this going to a secluded place. And again, so you know that this has to do with profound reflections that come as a basis of comes based on the samadhi practice. You practice the samadhi, the quietness of the mind, and then these kind of reflections become possible. So here again, now the emphasis is on non-self rather than on impermanence. And here it is about the 6 sense spaces rather than the 5 khandhas. And you may wonder, why is non-self in regard to the 6 sense spaces? Why impermanence is in regard to the 5 khandhas? Is there any significance to that? Why aren't we talking about the 5 khandhas here as well? What is the reason for this? And I don't think there is any particular reason. I think the reason is just that they want to be inclusive. They want to use different ways of doing it to show a more aspects of the path, so to speak. But if you read the Khandha Samyutta and the Salayatana Samyutta, you will see that the 5 khandhas are contemplated as impermanent, as dukkha and non-self. And exactly the same thing with the 6 senses, also impermanent, dukkha and non-self. So these things apply, all of these things apply to both of these sets. So anyway, that's my personal feeling. I don't think there is any significance to that difference there. And then again, so what do? And of course, what you do here is that when you practice the samadhi, you see that the I and the forms are actually disappearing, right? They are gradually disappearing until you go to a place where they have ceased completely and there is no access at all anymore to the I or to forms. You have gone beyond the I, so to speak. And the further along that process you are, the more powerful will be your ability to understand that these things are non-self. Of course, once you have abandoned completely the I, you have no access to it anymore, then you know with absolute certainty that the I is non-self. Because something that you cannot access, something that you have no control over because it's no longer within your accessible region, that by its very definition means that this is non-self. It is outside of your completely outside of your perceptual sphere or whatever. So the I is non-self and forms are non-self, right? These two things obviously go together. I and forms. They're part and parcel of the same thing in a sense. And then the same thing is true for all the other main 5 senses, all the way down to the body. All of these things disappear more and more as you go into samadhi and eventually disappear so completely that you have no access to them anymore. And then you know that there must be non-self. Then the insight really comes that these things are got nothing to do with you. They are just phenomena that arise in the world, and that's all it is. The most difficult one, of course, as always, is the mind itself, to see the mind as non-self. Because the mind is still there, even in samadhi, there is this powerful, very powerful experience of bliss or whatever, of unity and all this kind of thing, unity with God and all that kind of stuff. So then that's the very last thing that it is. You have insight in as non-self, is the mind and all the mental phenomena that come with that. And of course, at that point, once you see that, that is when stream entry happens. And because you see the mind is non-self, a corollary of that is that you know also that the idea of a God, a permanent God, a creator God, by definition is impossible, because the idea of a permanent God is really just a projection of the sense of self that we have inside of us. Once you have known that there's nothing in the 5 khandhas, nothing in experience that can be permanent, you also know directly or inferentially or whatever it is, that the idea of a permanent God is also impossible. So this is part of that non-self experience of stream entry here. So there you are. That's the perception of non-self in brief, so it's really just seeing that these things have got nothing to do with you. You can abandon them completely, just like you can abandon, a piece of, what does the Buddha say? Piece of feces on your stuck on your finger. That's so you can abandon all of these things. Okay, so those are those 2 perceptions at the beginning there. Let's just move on, because there are quite a few perceptions here, and there's some interesting things coming throughout all of this. And what ananda is the perception of unattractiveness? Here a bhikkhu reviews this very body, upward from the soles of the feet and downward from the tips of the hairs, enclosed in skin as full of many kinds of impurities. There are in this body hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, stomach, excrement, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, snot, fluid of the joints, and urine. Thus he dwells contemplating unattractiveness in this body. This is called the perception of unattractiveness. So this is the asubha sanya, which is talked about here, and one of the very, not very, but fairly common perceptions that you see developed talked about in the sutras, and of course it is found also in the Satipatthana Sutta, and for this reason it takes on a bit of importance because of that. Asubha, how is this done? What is it? First of all, what does it mean, the idea of asubha? And subha itself means beautiful. So, for example, in the sutras they talk about developing the perception of the beautiful. Subhangti adimutta is you are focused on the beautiful, and this is one of the first stages when you do things like metta practice and that sort of thing. You see the beautiful, right? Metta is a perception of the beautiful. It's important to understand that Buddhism is not just about focusing on the non-beautiful or the unattractive. A very large part is also about focus on the attractive. And this is what you do through things like, getting into samadhi, getting into the Brahma Viharas. So remember that a very important part of this is actually that happiness that comes from focusing on the beautiful things in life. But by beautiful things, we don't mean sensually enticing things, we mean spiritually beautiful things. Metta, love, compassion, kindness, all of these kind of things, that kind of beauty here. So that is the first thing here. The second point here is that the meaning of the word asubha, when you put the A in front of a word in Pali, subha is beautiful, that A in front can have different meanings depending on the context. Sometimes the A can mean the negation of that term. So if subha means attractive, then asubha means unattractive. At other times the A doesn't mean the negation of the term, it just means the absence of that quality. Right? So asubha can also just mean the absence of the beautiful. So it is called in English has a very fancy term called a privative prefix. It deprives the quality of that particular word. And this is one way of understanding that word asubha, is that you are basically just depriving, you no longer have the perception of beautiful in the body. You get a neutral feeling, a neutral view of the body instead of actually becoming too negative about the body. And this is quite important, right? If you become really, really negative about the body, it can have some very dramatic consequences. I'm sure most of you who are here, who are monastics at least, you know the origin story to the third parajika, right? The third parajika is all about not killing living beings, and the origin story to that is one of the strangest and one of the most kind of horrifying stories in the whole Buddhist canon, perhaps, and that is the story where all these monks, the Buddha goes on retreat and he has given them the asubha kamatan, right? Okay, you're going to do asubha bhavana, asubha sanya, and then after the Buddha comes out from the retreat, he sees Venerable Ananda and he says to Venerable Ananda, how come the Sangha is so diminished? What happened to all the monks? Oh, they have all committed suicide because they did too much asubha sanya. Right? And that is, and then the Ananda says, well, okay, please Bhante, please teach us something else, because this is kind of heading in the wrong direction. It's a very strange story, right? It's very weird, and it's almost very hard to understand exactly what is going on there. There have been some papers and things written on this, and I can't remember now. There's always some explanation for these things that people come up with. But the point is, and I think that is the thing, is that these kind of perceptions can be taken too far and taken in the wrong way. Instead of just neutralizing our desire for the body and sensual desire, we take it to the opposite extreme and become some kind of self-mortification, some kind of self-torture. And apparently even today there are people who take these asubha kammatthans to the point where they are kind of vomiting and things because their perception of the body is so becomes so negative in a sense. So remember the purpose of this. Take it gradually. If you're going to use this kind of meditation object, do it gradually. Do what feels reasonably comfortable. Don't make your life miserable because of these kind of things, and then you will be using it in the right way. And sometimes it can be quite useful if you just use it very carefully like that. It's not a major problem. So be wise about these things. So let's have a quick look at how it is described here. Here, a bhikkhu reviews this very body upward from the soles of the feet and downwards. I've already read this out, so I'm not going to read it out again. And so the point here is that one of the important points here is this idea of this very body, imang eva kayang, or ayang eva kayo. This very body means you focus on your own body first of all. And this is one of those important principles again in the Dhamma, that the desire that you have for the body, for the senses, for karma, it starts off with your relationship that you have to yourself. There's actually a very nice sutta about that in the Anguttara 7s, I think, which talks about how we end up getting into relationships. And it always starts off with attachment to yourself, your own body, and who you think you are as a body, especially your gender, right? Whatever that may entail. So you start off with your own body, and that is where the meditation should be focused on, first of all at least. And later on you can kind of expand it out. But that is the basic thing here. And then the attraction to other people fades as a consequence of that. And then you look at all of these things, right? And I suspect there are probably many different ways you can do this. But as far as I'm concerned, all you really have to do is just to review your body, to know, to almost like feel, almost literally, that these things are inside of you. You can almost see your body, right? You see all the details. The skin is what makes this body beautiful, right? Or usually that's how we look at things, or the hair and all this kind of stuff. Take that away, and the body is not very attractive anymore. The body without skin is fairly kind of unattractive. I don't know if you have seen some of these displays they had. There was a famous German scholar, Günther von Hagen, who had this thing called body worlds. He traveled around the world, and they had displays of body. We had taken off all the skin of the body, and they had what he called plasticized them, so they were actually kept intact even though they were dead bodies and with all the skin off. He had some kind of special technique would actually preserve the bodies, and you can see these bodies, right, without any skin, and it's not very attractive, and yet that is still relatively attractive compared to a body when it hasn't been gone through this process that he put them through. So it becomes the body without skin is not very attractive. So you just remember that. You remember this is inside of you right now, right? All of these things, all these impurities, all this kind of stuff. You kind of see the food after you swallow the food, right? It goes through the intestinal system, being digested, comes out of the other end. The whole process is kind of it's not very pleasant, not the sort of thing you like to think about too much, depending on how attached you are to your body. And of course, one of the important aspects is the skeleton. Sometimes people are afraid of skeletons, and they forget that they are carrying around with them a skeleton all the time. It's right here, right? You can't really get away from the skeleton. It's always there. So you remember that. You kind of feel the skeleton inside of you. It is right here all the time. So the skeletons are not all that scary after all. But it takes away some of the attraction to the body, some of that, So sometimes these things can be useful, and like everything else, these are perceptions that you have to learn to build up, and over time they become powerful. And once it is powerful, you can use that perception in your meditation practice. So you sit down and you meditate, and for example, you are watching the breath, some kind of sensual thought arises, and if you have built up the perception of an attractiveness, you can straight away bring that into the mind to counteract that sensual thought. Or, as one of the monks he was telling me, he uses this kind of perception as his main meditation practice. And you can do that, and you can kind of go to the skeleton, right? Focus on the skeleton. And just by focusing on that, you can get samadhi based on these kind of things. And there are other people I know as well who have done that. And then you can get even samadhi nimittas and enter jhana through these kind of perceptions as well. Okay. So that is the perception of unattractiveness. So let's move on to the next one. These are kind of a bit more down to earth. The first two perceptions here are really elevated, and they're really mostly to do with the very end of the path. But these ones here are a bit more kind of relevant for everybody, I suppose. So the fourth one, and what, Ananda, is the perception of danger? Here, having gone to the forest, to the foot of a tree, or to an empty hut, a bhikkhu reflects thus: this body is the source of much pain and danger, for all sorts of afflictions arise in this body. That is eye disease, disease of the inner ear, nose disease, tongue disease, body disease, head disease, disease of the external ear, mouth disease, tongue disease, tooth disease, cough, asthma, catarrh, pyrexia, fever, stomachache, fainting, dysentery, gripes, cholera, leprosy, boils, eczema, tuberculosis, epilepsy, ringworm, itch, scab, chickenpox, scabies, hemorrhage, diabetes, hemorrhoids, cancer, fistula. Whew, okay. So it looks like they have taken every conceivable disease and kind of added it in there. This is the only place in the suttas where this list of illnesses occurs. It doesn't occur anywhere else. So I guess this is the kind of diseases that were prevalent perhaps at that time. And then illness originating from bile, phlegm, wind, or the combination. Illness is produced by change of climate. Illness is produced by careless behavior. Illness is produced by assault. Illness is produced by the result of kama, and cold, heat, hunger, thirst, defecation, and urination. Thus he dwells contemplating the danger in this body. This is called the perception of danger. The first thing I'd like to point out here is that the word illness produced by the change of climate, illness produced by assault, illness is not really a good translation. And I am partly at fault for that because I reviewed all of this before it was published. I should have caught that one actually, because really the Pali word is abada, and abada is all about not illness. Illness is usually gilana. Abada is more like any kind of problem you have with the body, right? Affliction is probably a better word. So it could here mean kind of any, not just diseases, but wounds and all this kind of stuff is part of this. And you can see that from the last part there. So here we are basically contemplating, is a little bit similar to the previous one, but here it is more the kind of direct problems, the direct pains and problems that arise from having a physical body, and probably also going to the mind to some extent, because the body and the mind, of course, influence each other in this way here. So after all that long list of illnesses, you have illnesses originating from bile, phlegm, wind, or the combination. Now that little thing there is, as I understand it, is essentially the way that illnesses were described at the time of the Buddha. This originating from bile, phlegm, and wind, this is the way that illnesses were looked at, the causality, how they were diagnosed in those days. They were diagnosed as coming from these kind of causes. So that is, in its own right, that is really, that already includes all illnesses when you see that little phrase right there. Illnesses originating from these three things and the combination. So it's an ancient Indian way of classifying the origination of illnesses according to certain causes. So really all illnesses are already included in that, which is my understanding of this. And the previous addition of all the other illnesses is more like just a addition to what is already a complete thing in its own right. Right? So that is the illnesses. Then we have affliction produced by change of the climate, right? It is too cold, it is too hot, etc., etc. Illness is produced by careless behavior, by assault, and then after that, then you have affliction produced as the result of karma. And this, of course, is very important for our understanding of the workings of karma, what karma actually means. This is one of those suttas. This particular standard paragraph you have here, apart from all the illness at the beginning, is found in a few places in the suttas, 3 or 4 places I think it is. You find this particular paragraph. And of course this makes it very clear that everything we experience is not the result of karma. There's a lot of things in life that we experience which has nothing to do with karma at all. This is what this says, right? Very often in kind of popular Buddhist ideas that everything we experience, every feeling we have is somehow the result of some action we did in the past. But actually that is not really understanding the suttas properly here. According to the suttas, only a small amount of things, probably a minority of things, probably only a small minority are the result of karma. The rest is just the result of being human. Right, here we are in the human realm. If you got this body, you're going to be cold and hot sometimes. If you got this body, sometimes you're going to break a leg. If you have this body, sometimes you're going to hear nasty words. Sometimes you might even get assaulted. Sometimes you're going to step on something and trip outside. All of these things have reasons that have nothing to do with karma, but just is the very fact that you are born as a human being. Sometimes you get fired from your job. Sometimes you have a divorce. Sometimes you get very ill. Why? Not because of karma, but because you are human. You are in this realm, and this is what you can expect in the human realm. So very important thing for our understanding of how karma actually works. Even things like assault, right? I mean, people would think that if you get assaulted, surely that's the result of bad karma. But even that is actually very often just the fact that you are in the wrong place at the wrong time. Careless behavior, right? If you have careless behavior, you can't complain about bad karma. It is your careless behavior that is the reason for that particular affliction, whatever it is that you get. And this is very useful. Sometimes people ask about things like the great tsunami that also hit Sri Lanka back in 2004 or something like that. This great tsunami that had such massive bad consequences in so many places. The worst places was, of course, Sumatra and Indonesia that had about 100,000 people, I think, died in that tsunami. And Sri Lanka also was very badly hit by that. And people often ask, well, here, there's a whole village that was swept away. Everybody in that village died. Did everyone in that village have bad karma, so they had to die at that time? It seems strange, right? Why would everyone in that village have bad karma and they would all die at the same time? And looking at this, you can start to understand what is going on. It wasn't necessarily the case that everyone there had bad karma. Maybe there were some who had bad karma, possibly, but the majority were probably just at the wrong place at the wrong time. And because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, the tsunami came and they died. Sometimes human life is short, right? Sometimes you can't do anything about that. Sometimes this is just the way things are. You can protect yourself to some extent by making good karma, but at the end, this is just part of the nature of human life. So keep this in mind, because once you look at these things in the right way, we can make better sense of some of the events, some of the way things unfold in the world outside. If you read one of the suttas that talks about this is the Chulakama Vibhanga Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 135, the short exposition on karma. And in that sutta, this is the sutta people usually refer to when they say, oh yeah, short life must be bad karma. But that's actually not, as far as I can see, not a correct reading of that sutta. What that sutta says is that if you kill living beings, then a consequence of that is that you will have short life, right? So if you kill living beings, then in the future you will have short life. So the causality is from, if you do make bad karma, it will have bad consequences. But it doesn't say that if you have short life, it must come from bad karma. Right? These are two different things. Short life can come from many things, but bad karma will definitely lead to short life. So you're reversing the causality. You're not seeing the causality in the right direction, and that's why these kind of misunderstandings sometimes can arise. And I guess also it arises because people want to have explanations, right? They want to know, why did this happen to me? This is so bad, this is so terrible. Please, Bante, tell me what happened. Okay, bad karma, bad karma. It's very, very easy, right? Very easy thing, yeah. And then everybody is happy, they have a reason and everything is okay here. But sometimes it doesn't matter why these things happen. It doesn't actually matter, because what life is about is not explaining the past, not to explain why we are experiencing things, but it is to make the most out of the present moment so we don't have to experience these things in the future. That, of course, is what matters. Having to explain why things happened is kind of irrelevant as far as the path is concerned. Okay. So these are the various ways, various reasons for why we experience affliction, we experience problems, we experience cold, heat, hunger, thirst, defecation and urination. So these are the disadvantages in this body and the problems in this body. So you contemplate that danger in the body, and then that adds to the perception of danger. And again, it tells you that it is good to move away from this body. Not only is it unattractive, it is dangerous as well. And of course, one of the things that people often say, one of the great things that happens in samadhi, one of the great things that happens when you have an out-of-body experience is that you get out of this body. And people say, wow, it is so nice. This body is such an incredible burden. And we don't normally understand that. We're not normally aware of that because we are with the body all the time. Only when you leave the body completely and you move into a state which actually is devoid of that body do you start to understand how heavy it is, how full of problems it is, how you always have to take it to the toilet. I'm fed up of going to the toilet, wasting so much time doing nothing really. And so this is... But you actually have to move out of that. You have to move into a different realm, to higher reality, climb that mountain. When you stand at the top of the mountain and you look down, then you can understand what is going on there. So again, you use this just to get you on the right track, and hopefully eventually one day you will have that full understanding by getting into samadhi itself. Okay, I think we better stop there because we have been going for almost 1 hour. And I think that this afternoon we should be able to finish off the rest. So I'll see you again at 3 o'clock.